Okay, Dan.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just got started. I want to first thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present, possibly to the largest audience I've given a talk to. I'm going to talk about O-ring production networks, and it's collaborated with Banu, Cecilia, and Kelly. All of them are now possibly monitoring chat box. So if any questions, feel free to type any questions, and they're going to address them. So what is the beginning point of our inquiry? So this is we're thinking about our starting point is the seminal contribution of O-ring theory by Mike Kramer in 1993. So for those who haven't heard about O-ring, basically it is heavily motivated by the tragic explosion of the spaceship Challenger, and later people found it's really coming from the failure of a very small part, what's called O-ring. And from that observation, Mike Kramer basically generalized that to a lot of economic phenomenon, in the sense that if you want to produce high quality output, then you will need a whole series of complementarity in terms of the high quality task inputted by these laborers. So think about this rationale. When you think about within firm, we will observe that often high quality workers tend to work with each other. So this is the original conjecture by Mike Kramer by focusing on the within firm. But easily, the same rationale also generalized across the boundary of the firm. When you're thinking about across firms, the firms that value high quality output might also value high quality input. That's exactly the point also made by a later paper in Kugel and Verhoeven, where they show in micro level data that the price of individual firms' output are often highly positively correlated with the price of the input. Okay, and when you think about this general idea of the O-ring and to think about the production network, then you realize that an important conjecture we're going to put on the table here is that in a lot of cases, firms' quality choices will depend on its own labor force's ability, and also more importantly, it could also depend on the quality of the other firms in its production chain, both in terms of upstream and also downstream. So what this paper is trying to do is really putting this idea proposed by Mike Kramer into the production network. And we will provide an empirical and quantitative assessment of the O-ring mechanism in a production network. Okay. And before I go into the details of all the model and estimation stuff, I want to just put you into the empirical context of what we'll be looking at. We'll be investigating micro data from the Turkish manufacturing industry. So what I'm showing you here is just a very simple case study in the sense that, when you think about Turkey and their major exports to the OECD country, it turns out to be the automobiles. Okay, so this is a kind of a survey done by a management scholar to a sample of around like 80 producers. So it's not a very large sample, but when you look at the question they asked, on the left side of my screen, they were asking these producers, what are the important things that are going to affect your supply relationships? Okay, basically in terms of what you value from a supplier. And not surprisingly, you can see they've been reporting, they really value the suppliers been using the new manufacturing practices. In some sense, the quality of the supplying components actually matters. But more interesting is on the right-hand side of my slides here, which is when they were asking these firms, what are the factors that are going to contribute to the success of your own advanced manufacturing technology implementation. And you can see in this table at the top, not surprisingly, this will involve, what his own labor force quality looks like. That's, also been consistent with Michael Kramer's thinking about like, you have high quality labor sought into these firms. But right below that, you can easily see, they also emphasize the cooperative relationship with their customers, as well as the cooperationships with the parts suppliers. Okay, so this gives us a kind of very strong anecdote evidence that this kind of across firm complementarity might also be very important in a production network context. So we're going to bring this idea, and then we're going to looking at a much larger data set, which is going to be covering the overall whole Turkish manufacturing. And then we're going to proceed in two steps. The first step, we're going to try to do some simple empirics. Okay, I'm going to show you that in the first part of this talk is that if we use the wage, in particular the firm component of the wages of the individual producers as a measurement device for firm quality, then we document in this data, it's a quite unique data, as I will touch upon later. It's a data about Turkish firm-to-firm trade, which you can trace, at the individual firm level, who their suppliers are and who their buyers are. We document a quite novel positive assortative matching pattern on wages using this micro-level data. And then also we're going to show that high wage manufacturing firms will disproportionately purchase and sell to each other in the aggregate. Okay, and then this is just simply cross-section, and then we're going to extend the analysis to also over time. What we'll be doing is we're going to estimate the effect of an idiosyncratic income-weighted trade shock on these individual producers. Then we'll be trying to look at both the within changes of these wages for these producers experience these shocks, as well as the wages of their suppliers. And in fact, we find impact on both of them. And associated with that, also more interestingly, we find that a lot of these changes of the own wages and also their suppliers' wages could be in part be explained by the changing composition of the workers they themselves are using, as well as the suppliers themselves have been using. So in some sense, you can observe non-trivial churning patterns for the firms that experience these shocks. Okay, so take away these empirics, we're gonna take them to our quantitative structural model. We're gonna construct a structural accrual model of the production network, export, and the endogenous quality choice. And we'll require the model to account for the usual suspects when we're estimating industry accrual models. We're gonna make them account for the joint distribution of the wage, size, and the buyer-seller connections that typically we now more often see in this network literature. And we also ask the model to account for the export participation kind of intensity patterns. But most importantly, we're asking our model to match the reduced form empirics we just documented. Importantly, the wage sorting pattern happening in the network, as well as the trade responses that we just documented. So we found in this quantitative version of the model, there's strong quality complementarity in Turkish manufacturing sector in terms of input-output quality. And meanwhile, we also found quite substantial friction in the region formation, which I'm going to get into detail later. But if we take this model and we then do the counterfactual analysis, thinking about a qualitative bias integration in trade coming from our baseline, what we find is that there's a very strong response in the general equilibrium. The equivalent force is actually very important. What we found here is that the quality upgrading are not only among the exporters. In fact, it induced a broad set of firms in the network to upgrade their quality. Okay, and a lot of them are actually domestic firms. Also in this network, very much like in original Kramer's idea that the workers tend to actually sort, we also find a stronger sorting pattern across firms if you experience such a shock in the general equilibrium. And it turns out for both of these, the quality complementarity that we documented, both in the reduced form and in the model, is the key. When we actually re-quantify our model to another baseline case, where we only allow for Higgs neutral production in this network, despite the fact that we can match the same distribution of the wages, size, and buyer-seller connections, as well as the export pattern, the response in quality upgrading is much weaker in that specific equilibrium. What we found is that it's giving it the same amount of shock, it's much weaker, and our model actually is around like 5 or 6 times larger than the response in that baseline case. Okay, so that's just basically a helicopter view about what I'm going to talk about today. And there's obviously a very large number of literature that are related to what we're doing here. Possibly a slide, I'm not doing the kind of the right service to all the papers. Our papers related to literature about quality and inputs that I already talked about. It's also related to this very large literature about the positive assortative matching among the workers and between the workers and the firms. There's also a smaller literature talking about assortative matching in the networks, but mostly using the industry level data. And then, there's an rapid expanding literature about the networks and the Higgs neutral technology. I think we learn a lot from each of these strands of literature. I might have already also missed somebody in the audience. So definitely, let us know, if you have other works that we should read and we can learn from. But this is really incomplete list of papers that our work has been related to. Okay. So without further delay, let me just jump into the data. I know you possibly want to see the data and the empirical analysis. So the data we were using are the 2011 to 2015 value-added tax records collected by the Ministry of Finance in Turkey. As I said, the highlight of that is the value of all firm-to-firm trade exceeding a small minimum amount, around like US dollar $1,800. So basically, you can think about this as a whole universe of transactions among the manufacturers within Turkey. Okay, and we also augment that data with, since we're going to talk about trade, with the custom data as well as the firm level balance sheet. And then since we're also going to use the wages as our main yardstick to thinking about firm quality, and to some extent, we'll be thinking about the skill component of the workers. We're going to use also the match employee match data collected by the Turkish Social Security institution. Okay, and the main measurement here, what we'll be doing is to thinking about, first of all, now I'm going to tell you about in the cross section, how the firms being sought into each other in terms of certain dimension of the firm characteristics, right? So the focal point here are the firm level wages. So I'm going to so James asked me about a question. I'm going to possibly just directly pause and address the question. James asked about what do we know about the workers. We mostly know about the workers' gender and their a little bit more detailed like occupation, and also the and also their ages, and also the education. I think Banu can address you in more details about that. So when we talk about firm level component, there's a version of the analysis we're going to do. We're going to adjust for all these worker level characteristics and just only take out the firm level component into that. So when we were talking about the firm level wages, that's the rough measurement. And then we'll also be having a way to measure the suppliers' wages. Since firms are going to purchase from multiple suppliers, what we'll be doing is to thinking about a weighted average of your suppliers. Here, what we're going to use is the share weighted log wage of the suppliers. And this F term is going to be the expenditure share that you spend on a specific supplier. Okay, so now the first regression we'll be doing will be really simple. After controlling for a bunch of industry regional dummies, we're going to just regress the individual suppliers' wages of that firm on firm's own wages. Okay, so this is the first table I'm going to show you to thinking about a assortative matching pattern on the wages within this firm-to-firm network. The baseline number I'm trying to highlight here is around 0.259. Okay, so this is a number that we're going to take as the baseline value when we're thinking about the cross section. Okay, so you can think about when your own wage goes up, the average share weighted wage of the suppliers are also going up. And of course, off your mind, you're going to think about, okay, there's always a wage size premium somehow documented in the literature. Is that really the wage or kind of size? We did a lot of that in our paper appendix, but just for this talk, just quickly, on this column 3, we do highlight that even you control for the employment size, there's still a strong sorting pattern in the wages. Okay, and in our appendix, we're going to do a more systematic canonical analysis to thinking about the importance, the relative importance of each of them. But here, just to remind you that this pattern is going to be robust by including the other from observed characteristics. Okay, so then the second thing I will be doing is just to show you graphically what it looks like. Basically, since we have a linear specification, I can show you that graphically that's not that different from like a linear pattern. And then since we're using the share weighted wages coming from the suppliers, we're also going to do a very simple decomposition, because you already have this on your mind, thinking about the weighted share, what do you mean? So is that because the high wage firms been using just a set of high wage suppliers, or they just purchase relatively more for any of the existing suppliers they have who pay high wages? How do we separate this, these two stories? And turns out, we have the story on both sides. What we did here is that we're going to decompose the supplier's wages into an unweighted mean. This is what we call the extensive margin, and also an intensive margin, which turns out usually people call a covariance term, right? So this is second term is that thinking about how much more you're going to purchase, allocate your expenditure towards the supplier who's been paying a high wage. So combine these two terms, mechanically, they should add up to the original coefficient, 0.259, I already showed you, and on this graph, right? So basically now what we're going to do is to decompose that 0.259 into two margins, and we'll also ask our model to match both of the margins later. And you can see here is that in the extensive margin, the coefficient is 0.152, and the intensive margin is 0.107. So both are highly significant. So both stories are happening. And the extensive margin accounts for around like 60% of the sorting pattern we see in the data. And the intensive margin accounts for around 40%, okay? So this is the cross-sectional pattern. And now I'm gonna just quickly move on to the overtime pattern. Before I go there, let me just also try to show you one more cross-sectional fact that is highly related to the wage sorting, which is in terms of the aggregate expenditure shares, okay? So let me just go through on this specific table because, it's a little bit, there are too many numbers floating around on that table. So here, the table has two panels. The upper panel, what we're doing is that we're gonna, since we sort the firms based on their wages, we can put them into quantiles, okay? Each firm can be in the lowest quantile, which is 1, all the way up to the fifth, which is the top 20%, above top 20% in terms of the wages they have. And on the row, we're gonna put all the buyers in this network. And on the column, we're gonna put all the sellers, right? So what's going on here is like each cell will be thinking about is that in this manufacturing network, what wage quantile firms as a buyer been buying from what wage quantile of firms as a seller, okay? They show up on both sides, right? So this is just a network. But as you can see, not surprisingly, the highest wage sellers are always more popular, right? So you can see on the expenditure share, in terms of expenditure share, all the quantile actually going to buy more from high wage sellers. But what's more interesting is that when you look at the share, expenditure share, all the row is going to sum up to be 1, all right? So what's going on here is that the high wage buyers going to actually disproportionately allocate the expenditure to the high wage sellers, okay? And the lower panel is going to document the fraction of the connections, meaning that the number of supplies they were having in this network, and a very similar pattern pops up here, okay? So this is highly related to the sorting regression I just showed you in the cross-section, although it's not equivalent because, to having this aggregate expenditure share, we also need to know a lot of other things, including the more detailed, the production technology at the micro level, okay? So just take those two on your mind as the main cross-sectional pattern we see from this data when we actually move along. By the way, I also saw like the chat box kind of popping up a lot. So, also just feel free to raise your hand and ask me a question. I know Cecilia's been really good at, or Banu been really good at answering questions in the chat box, but I'll be happy to answer any question too. Otherwise, I'm kind of jobless here.
Daniel, since you asked,
yeah,
George. So I was just trying to figure out like how you're really controlling for like the spatial distribution of wages. So if I'm in New York City and I'm mostly buying from guys who are nearby me versus Rochester, I would see the wages are really, I'm buying from high wage suppliers and it's not really quality.
Yeah, definitely fair point. So that's the reason why we've been controlling for a whole battery of industry region specific fixed effect almost always in these regressions.
But
So
is
these are going to be also pair specific. Yeah.
How fine is the region in some sense? Like
these are very detailed. These are very detailed provinces of Turkey. Yeah.
But New York State wouldn't be a good example. For example, like New York City and New York and Rochester are very different.
Right. We could try finer.
Do you have like a distance measure?
Sorry.
If you had like a distance measure, it might help.
Yeah, definitely. But by the way, I also do believe, later as you will see that, so far we haven't really been touching upon the spatial dimension too much, but later when we were talking about the buyer-seller relationship and when they look for each other, I do believe, one big part of those frictional stuff that we kind of model in a stylized way is going to be coming from some kind of spatial. There will be some kind of spatial pattern there, but it just doesn't get fairly reflected in all these reduced form because so far we've been just trying to think about all these spatial patterns being kind of swamped by these specific fixed effects. Okay, of course we can experiment with much finer ones. We would see their location, so we could do a lot of robustness check down the road. Definitely, that's a fair point to worry about how detailed they are. Okay. All right, I see another hand. Please just feel free.
Can I ask a quick question? So in most firm-level data sets, a lot is driven by superstars. So I'm just wondering how prevalent superstar buyers and suppliers are.
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna show you later a more detailed magnitude about the concentration in this industry. In particular, we're gonna thinking about when we move on to a quantitative model, definitely we're going to match the overall concentration of the sales within the network by top firms, by the specific percentile of the firms. And so far, just to quickly answer your question, our top quantile wage firms account for around 73% of the total network sales. So it's fairly big, but we do have to account for that. Yeah, later. Yeah. Okay. So now let me just quickly move on to the overtime pattern because I just show you I just show everyone the cross section. So the overtime pattern, the idea here is that we've seen in the cross section there's a interesting sorting pattern, but it's not clear about like over time can we show any of the firm responses, right? So here this basic idea we're using is very similar to a very large literature in trade these days. Now this is thinking about this world demand shock as kind of a shift share instrument. So basically what we construct here is a relatively standard export shock variable with some twist. Okay, let me just tell you about what's the standard part. The standard part is this XCKF, right? So the XCKF is going to be the share of firms' exports in a specific product category K to an importing country C, right? So this is going to be the usual one. That's going to be shift share. We're going to take the base year, which is before our sample 2010, to construct this share. This part is going to be the export shock coming from each country. This will be a little bit non-standard one because of course we have to leave out Turkey. This is relatively well known. Thinking about thinking about two European countries, one with much higher income, such as like Germany, versus another one possibly with much lower income. What we're going to be thinking about non-standard here is that we're going to weigh this import demand by the income per capita of this purchasing country. And I will also show you later that this weight turns out to be quite important. Why we're doing that? Because all we have been focusing here is to think about quality bias, right? And with the usual caveats that high income country will demand high quality imports, this is going to give us this idea about how important this quality dimension is when we're thinking about these export shocks. Okay. Okay. So here's the result coming from this shift share regression. Let me just show you first just what do we typically think about just as the reduced form. When you think about these export shocks, and when we think about the change of the firm's own wages, and regress that on the export shock, again, controlled for a bunch of fixed effects, and thinking about this as just over time changes now, it's the coefficient around like 0.042. Okay, so when we tie the interpretation of this value, in thinking about just around like 10% of this export shock the firm's been experiencing, compared with another firm which does not experience that idiosyncratic export shock, the wage of that firm been going by more, around 0.4%. Okay, so that's the rough magnitude that we can think about the own firm response coming from these shift share export demand shock. And then one can also look at the suppliers of the firm in terms of how much do they respond to that. This is just coming from an indirect channel, right? Coming from the fact that my downstream customers now being experienced these shift share export shock. And what you can see here is that if you regress the supplier's wage changes on the firm's own, they get around like 40% of your increase. So in other words, their wages go up by around like, for each 10% of the export shock you experience, your supplier's wages also gonna go up by around 0.16%, around half of what you'll be getting. Okay. As I also kind of emphasize that, to having a quality biased export shock is important here, because if you do not adjust for the income per capita, actually you do not find a very significant result for the within firm changes of the wages. Okay. There's obviously competing channels. I don't see a hand raised because maybe there's a big audience, but the other thing you will have to worry.
Daniel,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but Rock Arminger has asked, how is a trade shock idiosyncratic to the firm?
Oh yeah, Rock. So this is related to how we construct these, right? So the important caveat is like any common thing, it will be absorbed by all these industry year, province specific dummy that we have here, and the idiosyncratic part is really been coming from these shares, and these shares are going to be very important to kind of differ across different firms, and that's going to generate the variation. That's a key source of variation for what we call the export shock here. Think about the firm who used to export to Germany versus exporting to France in Turkey, and this heterogeneity being reflected here, and that's generating the idiosyncrasy across different firms. I hope this answers your question. Feel free to let me know if that doesn't.
So I get that not two firms will have exactly the same shares, but
yeah,
similar firms are likely to have similar shares, and generally Turkish firms are not exporting a lot to Zimbabwe or I don't know, or Argentina. They export to neighbors and to Europe and so on. So I understand there is differences, but those differences got to be an order of magnitude smaller than that they're highly correlated across firms. That's what I mean.
Right. To the extent that if they were highly correlated across firms, the common component would always be absorbed by any of the industry effects, right? So what's being left out is going to be that's how we interpret that. Is whatever being left out is coming from the difference of this component, and we treat them as being more the idiosyncratic part. Yeah, definitely. If you do the raw data, it could very well be correlated across different firms. Yeah.
So Daniel, just to add something there. So part of the variation is also coming from the product dimension, right? I mean, two Turkish firms might export to the same country, but we are also exporting the product variation. So they should be exporting the same product to the same country in exactly the same sales share. So it's quite unlikely.
Right. Okay. So yeah, thanks for the addition, Danu. Okay. So let me just continue by saying that actually the second element we look at is the more unique element that is present in our data, because the wage changes could also have other competing stories. In particular, we do see the earlier models about trade and labor. We do see there are a lot of contributions out there already to thinking about the S-bar shocks might changing the scale of the firm and could potentially also changing the wages, through other channels, say bargaining and everything else. Here, what we're trying to document is the compositional change. Okay, so here, what we try to do is to looking at two additional dimensions of that change. One is that we look at the composition of the workers. Basically, what we're looking at is that, if we look at the composition of workers, we see a lot of new workers. What are the characteristics of these new workers that push up your firm's wages? In fact, when you look at these new workers, they do have higher wages in the base period compared with all the existing workers of the same firm. Okay, and this is going to be positively significant impact on the changes that we just documented in the previous slide. Okay, the second part that I want to highlight here is also more unique to the data is that who are your new suppliers, right? So you do see that suppliers' wages been going up, and also in part that also being explained by the composition of the new suppliers. What you see here is that these new suppliers, relative to your existing suppliers, at the base period t equal to 0, they also pay higher wages. Okay, so combine these two elements. Basically what one tries to pitch in the reduced form and thinking about the story is that when we document these changes of the suppliers' wages facing by this firm, there's also a non-trivial churning pattern there in the sense that your new suppliers also contribute to the new wages that we documented in the previous regression. Okay, so this is just try to say it's not only happening within that firm, it's also happening across and also happening in terms of compositional change. Okay, I hope, and then just to end the empirical session, because I think we're targeting timing for like a 1 hour talk. Just to end the empirical session, I want to show you just one very standard regression. Okay, this is the one that a lot of us looking at network data these days at the micro level has been already documented. One is that when you think about the number of customers as well as the number of suppliers a specific firm has, it's very much strongly correlated with your sales. And this elasticity in our data is around 0.5. Okay, the number of customers being increasing your sales with a slope around 0.46, and number of suppliers being increasing with a slope around 0.59. So if you double your sales, essentially your number of customers goes up by like 46%, and your number of suppliers goes up by around like 60%. That's roughly the elasticity we will also shoot for in our quantitative part of the model. I see a few other questions in the chat box. Maybe I'll pause for like 1 minute. Do you guys want to ask that directly? Okay, I guess if you don't feel comfortable enough, I would just I'll just keep going. So just taking stock of the empirical findings here, what we show is just strong positive assortative matching pattern in wages. High wage firms match more with each other, and they spend relatively more on the high wage suppliers. The carded biased export demand shock at the idiosyncratic exporter level we constructed is associated with the increase in firm wages and its own supplier wages, and in part explained by new workers and new relationships. And the sales turns out to be the largest indicator on the number of input and output linkages that we see in this network. Okay, so these are what I try to summarize from the empirics. And now we're gonna kind of taking these observations and going to construct a model that will be speaking to that. Okay. Inevitably, I try to the
So it looks like we got a technical difficulty here. Let's see if we can get Dan back online.
I guess we could have Anna Cecilia take over.
That's true.
No, I hope not. Not prepared.
I could
George,
give the slides.
do you want to disconnect him and that way he'll have to reconnect?
He's
Oh,
probably just,
I could do that too, I guess.
yeah.
Let me stop this video for a second.
Huh. Anna Cecilia, are you texting with him or anything?
Yeah, this is our first.
No, like I'm muted by hosts.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
I wonder if he knows that he's not here anymore, or if he's just still giving his presentation in his office.
Do you want to give him a call, Anna Cecilia?
George,
Yes, I'll get my cell phone and try to call him.
George, do you have a way to throw him out? I don't. Maybe as a co-host, I'm not allowed. Are you allowed?
I could stop video.
Hi, sorry, I think I got some problem.
We got you. Yeah.
Hear you now. Yeah, maybe you want to turn off your video if you're having some bandwidth issue.
Okay, yeah. Can you make me co-host and I can share the screen again? Yeah.
Yeah, where'd you go?
Okay. Okay. I guess I was just starting the model, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where you left off. You died on this slide.
Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. So at least that's a good stopping point. Okay. So yeah. So I'm gonna talk about them here. Here I'm gonna talk about the model, and I want to highlight three important features of the model we'll be looking at here. One is obviously endogenous quality choice, but the second thing is that, as I already showed you, in our data there's a limited set of partners that you're going to be doing business with. So I'm going to look at the limited set of partners based on matching. Okay, so they will be looking for the right supply and customer, but they're going to direct their effort, but its effort is not going to be perfect. And then the other thing that obviously we're going to highlight is the quality complementarity in the production process, very much in the sense of what Kramer and Kruger-Verhoeven has been argued for, that your output quality and your input quality, as well as the labor inputs that you use, they're going to having a non-trivial complementarity there. On the labor market, we won't spend too much time, but you're thinking about them as like a ROI sorting model, that the workers being sorted into the task and the quality. Then we're going to have a service sector. I'm not going to talk about at all because of time, because that's just an residue sector. They're going to do a lot of the work in the GE, such as like balancing the trade and everything else. Okay, so let me basically focus on these three components I talk about here. So the first component is quality choice, right? So one thing, the quality choice here is determined by this variable Q, and what's the trade-off that firms been facing is that if I choose a high quality Q, then my efficiency would actually go down. Okay, so here this is a way to think about the model, is that there's a quality efficiency trade-off. If I want to produce a high quality output, I need to exert more effort, and this is going to reduce the production efficiency. So the benefit for having a high quality will be summarized in this equivalent object, big pi Q. This is an equivalent object that we're going to endogenize later. So far, you just take it as is given. So from a firm perspective, its life is relatively easy in terms of quality choice. Basically, he's going to look at all the potential quality choices he can pick from, and just to maximize the profit. Okay, the profit is going to be trading off high quality coming from the big pi Q and the efficiency cost coming from pick that specific qualitative Q. Okay. Okay. So now the second decision that I'm being doing will be to within this production network.
Sorry, Daniel, what's gamma?
Yeah. What's the Johnson? What's, oh, sorry. Yeah, we will define this gamma later. The gamma, you think about this as
Daniel got cut off again. Jonathan, gamma is a constant. It's a function of the other elasticity, sigma, beta.
We haven't seen beta yet.
Oh, sorry, I walked out when Daniel started. So essentially what gamma, this is the profit share of revenue. It's not sigma as in a standard monopolistic competition model, because larger or more productive firms are going to buy more, are going to search more. So they're going to have more suppliers, more customers, and as a result, their profit will be disproportionately higher. The elasticity of productivity with respect to revenue with respect to productivity is higher due to that effect, and gamma summarizes that. Is that somewhat clear?
I think so. Oh, wait.
Oh, is he back? Yeah.
hi. Hello.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi. Yeah, I think I should shut down my video maybe. Yeah. I can just keep the slides going. Jonathan, I was just answering a question. I didn't know if
I think Cecilia answered it for me, Daniel. Thanks.
Oh, okay, great. So so then given the quality choice, what's going on here is that the firm will then let me share the slides. Sorry. Okay, so given the quality choice, firm will make the optimal search decision, and facing these equivalent objects, capital DQ and CQ. These are the two important equivalent objects that will be endogenized later. But thinking about this DQ as being the one that firms will be facing when they were setting to each quality segment. This will be the quality demand coming from each quality segment. And the CQ will be the cost shifter that they will be getting by purchasing their inputs from each of the quality segments. So this will be the cost, and this will be the demand. So far treat them as very abstract because we're gonna microform them later. At the individual firm level, what they will be doing is that their production cost will be coming from a Cobb-Douglas production function. That's why that will be coming from the wage component, and it will be coming from the intermediate input component, CQ, okay? And the CQ will be depending on your search effort in the inputs market. So basically, this CQ is gonna be for each unit of your search effort, you will be getting this specific reduction of your cost, and multiplied by your search effort in input market. This will be the composite term entered into your cost. Okay, and then what your effort on the search market will be doing is to, given this DQ and CQ, you will try to maximize your profit. And what does this do? You know, this is not going to be directly enter into the complementarity of the production yet, but what the search will be doing is to giving you the mass of the buyer and the suppliers you will be observing in this network. And as I already kind of preempted when we talk about the empirical facts, the search effort is going to be highly related to the sales of these producers. So the elasticity term will be this 1 over beta V and 1 over beta M, which will be the curvature of your search cost function. Okay, so in the data, what's going to tell us about how elastic your number of customers related to your sales will be depending on beta V, and how elastic your number of suppliers related to your sales will be depending on this beta M. Okay, and given this component, and given your search effort, what you can have is having the DQ and CQ both enter into the profit shifter for the firm when they choose their quality. And as I already addressed Jonathan's question about this gamma term is really a composite term of all these search cost parameters. And intuitively, what it does is to amplify the initial heterogeneity in this model, which will be the Z and Q, and it will amplify the initial heterogeneity such that the more productive firm will post more ads in the search market, and they will magnify their network sales shifts. Okay, so once we have the search effort, you know, since I'm running out of time, I'm not going to talk too much about how they come into the formation of these networks, other than saying that it's very standard and very much comparable to the labor literature, right? So what you have is that you're going to have all these efforts aggregate together and call them VQ and MQ. And what you can do is to thinking about the overall tightness of this market during your search is going to be related to the aggregate search effort, MQ, from the buying side and the aggregate selling effort from the selling side, and this will give you the market tightness measures. And this will translate into the probability of matching for each of these producers. And before we move on, I want to highlight one more thing that is important here that I don't want to skip is this function phi v, okay? So what is this phi v function been doing here? Remember that in our empirical pattern, what we had was that high wage workers sought with each other. It happens both at the extensive margin as well as at the intensive margin. So in the extensive margin, how do we explain that high wage workers or how high wage firms would actually doing more business with the high wage firms? This is coming from this phi v term to the extent that if you yourself is a high quality seller, you will direct your search efforts more towards the other quality segments. Okay, so this phi v is going to getting us the sorting on the extensive margin of the firms. Okay, so that's one important component that we need to utilize in the quantitative version of our model.
So is that phi function or primitive?
These are primitive, yes. We will need to estimate. Later, we will also have to, Jonathan, we also have to partially endogenize that, because right now we are doing this still in a relatively mechanical way. We take this as primitive, but later when we're thinking about your own type, we might actually thinking about an optimization problem that you want to endogenously optimally targeting the type that you want to direct your search ads towards. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the second important component of the model, as I emphasized, is the intensive margin production technology. This is the production function that we borrow from our earlier work. Here, thinking about a Cobb-Douglas production function, which you will be using the labor, using the service input, as well as the manufacturing intermediate inputs, right? This is YM. And this YM component is going to building the overlaying feature that we emphasize. based on this phi y aggregator. Okay, if we get rid of the phi y, basically it's a very standard CES specification that will be used in most of the production network literature. What does the phi y been doing is to make sure that, say, if you were a firm producing quality Q, right, and if you were looking at all the inputs out there, which is the variety omega, you would disproportionately value a high quality inputs if you yourself were also of high quality. Okay. In other words, mathematically, what we need is this phi y function to be supermodular, log supermodular. Okay. And this phi y function will be governed by a parameter nu y and parameterized in this line. And this is an empirical question in terms of the magnitude of this nu y. Okay. So just to summarize the important part of the model, what we have here is the two function, phi y and phi v, that is going to be the more novel part that we're adding to an otherwise standard network production model. Okay, and these two components are going to govern the extent of sorting of the wages that we documented in the reduced form. And we're going to use the quantitative version of the model to account for those patterns. Okay, I'm not going to go deep into thinking about the CQ and DQ. Those are the equilibrium objects, as I mentioned. In equilibrium, they will have to be self-fulfilling. So we have to have this big aggregator that's going to add into them. Because of time limit, let me just skip this slide, and also skip the labor markets. But let me just quickly touch upon in the labor market. What we'll be doing here is to borrow this Roy model from the earlier work of Turing, as well as the more recent work by Costinot and Vogel, which very much having this flavor that the workers are heterogeneous in their labor endowment in terms of their comparative advantage of producing high versus low quality tasks. And just very much like predicted by the earlier work by Kramer, high skilled workers are going to sort themselves together into high quality tasks. And to that extent, what you can see in the data is that the wage will be a very good indicator about the quality of the firm. Okay, all right. So given this model, okay, and given the equivalence well defined, this is a slide that basically just defines the whole equilibrium. We will also take this model to an open economy. I was just describing a closed economy. This open economy, we don't have time for that, other than just saying the only addition here is this DFQ shifter that is going to be giving us the extent about how much quality bias are there in the actual market, right? So because once the DFQ over the domestic demand shift to DHQ is increasing, then the export will need to some quality upgrade. Okay, so that basically completes the whole model description. And I hope this, despite the fact it's a kind of brief description, just remind you what are the several key components that always put them into the red bold terms. Okay, these are the terms that we will need to quantify using our data. Just to remind you, phi y, okay, phi v, and the DFQ. Okay, these are the three components that's going to be played a chunk of the task in our quantitative exercise. Okay. Okay, now coming from the estimation, a lot of things are standard that I'm not going to go too much deep details into, but let me directly jump into a few things that's not standard. Okay, the first thing is about the identification of the phi v and phi y. Okay, and just to remind you, what we're gonna discipline these two parameters. One is to what extent in the extensive margin, high wage firm being kind of trading with each other. That's the regression coefficient we did in the reduced form when we're thinking about the extensive margin. That's going to identify the phi v plus. And when we look at the weighted wages, on the intensive margin, that's going to identify the phi y plus. Sorry, nu y plus. Okay, so these are the two components that we will identify using these regressions directly, sort of in the sense of an indirect inference. Okay. Another non-standard feature I want to highlight here is the endogenous technology choice. Okay, the one thing that I didn't really emphasize here is that firm will need to having an efficiency cost when they pick high quality, right? So the one component which is important for the firm's response is the punishment, which is the omega-2 bar here. This is the parameter that, to a certain extent, it's tough because for any of the joint distribution of wage and size, you can always come up with the initial fundamental omega-0 and omega-1 and getting the cross-section right. There's really no, strong identification argument to say what's going to determine the elasticity, okay? And what is going to determine this elasticity is coming from the shift share regression, because in the shift share regression, the core insight is that this omega-2 is going to change the firm's response. And by seeing the 2 point of data of what Q will be looking like once you shift the demand of these firms, this will give you the responsiveness of the D parameter omega-2. Okay, so these are the 2 things that's otherwise standard. The rest of them, I'm just going to skip over them because they're just the standard moments that will be matching. So we're going to match 41 moments. We're going to match the number of suppliers and number of customers in the data across different wage quantiles. These are going to tell us the efficiency of the matching market that we have. We're going to match, as we addressed earlier question, the total network sales share, as well as the lot sales across the firms. These are going to tell us the fundamental firm capability distribution, okay? And then we're matching all the export participation patterns in terms of across different wage quantiles, what the fraction of exporters, as well as the export intensity. These are going to give us the export DF shifters. The rest are just what I already mentioned, okay? So once we get these moments, there's something else we could look at to judge the fit of the model. Remember, there's this aggregate purchase share and the sales share that we never targeted. So when we were looking at the firm-to-firm trade pattern in the network, the upper panel basically showing you what's happening in the data, the lower pattern showing you what's happening in the model. Okay, so these things were not targeted, and they were also, our model now also doing a good job of getting all these aggregated shares right. Okay, by matching the individual firm level sorting patterns, these aggregate shares kind of come very close to each other through the lens of our model. Okay, I know I've like in nominal time I have 1 minute. I can just like last week, like Brent, maybe I request like 5 more minutes just to go through my counterfactual.
Yeah, go ahead. We had some technical difficulties.
Okay, yeah. So I think this is the important part. So let me just a bit slow down on this. Okay, so the question is like, what's making a difference here? What's the big, why you're quantifying such like, a relatively sophisticated model? I hope, the model is going to give you an idea about, having this reduced form fact does matter in a general equivalent, okay? So let me just go through to say, what is the general equivalent counterfactual that we would do? Basically, what we did is to increase our export market demand shifter, DFQ, by around 3%. Why we pick this magical number? That is the amount that's going to change in our model, the export intensity of the individual firm exporters increase to an extent very close to the magnitude we saw in our reduced form shift share IV. Okay, so their export intensity is gonna shift, but very much like in the reduced form case that we saw in the shift share. And then what we do here is that we're gonna look at what is the magnitude of the quality upgrading and the wage responses that we saw in this specific general equivalent case, compared with the case that we only thinking about firms in getting these idiosyncratic demand shocks. Okay, so that is the case we call partial equivalent, but it's not exactly precise. That's the case that we can think about each firm without facing the change of the equivalent objects, in particular the DQ and the CQ. Okay, so what we find is that in this equilibrium in the G, the average quality upgrading and the wage responses are around like 3%. Okay, that's around like 5 or 6 times more than those happening in the partial equilibrium. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to just try to dissect a little bit about what's happening in the general equilibrium. Okay, remember that in the firm's quality upgrading decision, the most important component is this pi cube curve. Okay, this is how much benefit you're going to get, how much additional benefit you'll be getting from moving from a low quality to a high quality in your profit shifter when you're making your technology choice decision, right? What's going on in this general equilibrium is that this pi cube having two important components. One is the C cube, okay, and the other one is the D cube, okay. So what's going on here is that C cube, there's a very obvious pattern, you know, C cube should go down, you know, basically I'm just making it upward because to the power of 1 minus sigma, by the way, and then the C cube going up is because you are getting more and more high quality producers, suppliers closer in your quality segments, okay? And in this equilibrium, because of the abundance of those things, that actually increased your profitability of yourself producing high quality products, right? So that's basically making this curve steeper. The second part is the DQ, right? So the DQ at the top end, we know that there are a bunch of exporters there, and they're going to actually push up the demand for the high quality output. But on the other hand, what's going on is that once you're getting closer to the high quality segment, there are a lot of domestic firms also now start to request high quality input. And that's also going to make this curve steeper here, okay? So what you can see here in terms of the pi cube is a combination of the equivalent force coming from both the cost side and also the demand side. And so combine both of these equivalent forces, what you can see is a much steeper pi cube curve that makes a firm want to upgrade their quality in this specific equilibrium, okay? And as we can show that, you know, if we can try to think about another alternative economy with no such complementarity, meaning that we're going to shut down the new Y and the new V, okay? And then when we look at the same pi cube, as you can see here, is that everything is going to be flat, okay? You're not going to get the same force if you shut down all the complementarity here. So, and we can see that in this here, in this equilibrium, you know, what you can see, the only thing that are moving around the firm's quality decision will be this export market shock, but it's not large enough to generate the general equilibrium effect that we just saw in the previous slides. Okay, so let me just try to wrap up here because I think I already requested 5 additional minutes. Basically, as a conclusion, you know, hopefully I convinced you both in terms of empirics and also the quantitative model that this Kramer-style O-ring technology style is really important. So developing countries has traditionally relied on trade integration, you know, like Turkey, like China, and then now the least developing country. They've been using that as an important pathway for technology adoption. But we also observe the recent trend of decoupling of the global value chain, very much likely to continue. And it's particularly damaging for the least developing country in terms of the trade volume and the scale. And I think what our paper is going to show here is that even if you have just a moderate increase in the quality bias, not necessarily the scale, but the quality bias of the exports, that could influence the domestic producers' technology choices. Okay, so kind of related to some of the recent work by Penny Goldberg and Reed. And this amplification of this impact relies on the domestic and foreign search matching frictions, which we still model in a relatively stylized way in this current work. And also another thing that, you know, we didn't get questioned, but, you know, I want to highlight here is that we also took a very extremely optimistic view of the skill supply. We kind of not changing the wage schedule, which is not very likely true for the least developing country. You know, down the road, we might also try to think about what the labor supply curve should be looking like in this scenario. But in any case, any of the policies that target these areas, including the domestic search matching friction, as well as the skill supply, can be potentially fruitful to think about the benefit coming from these quality bias in export and further integration, as well as the firm's technology adoption. Okay, I want to just conclude there for any further questions.
All right, sounds good. So anybody who has questions, you can raise your hand and Daniel will call on you and off we'll go.
Okay. I saw the chat box being really busy, so maybe my class has been doing a great job answering all the questions.
I'll ask a question just since no one else wanted to. So the last little bit was a little fast for me, and just in terms of this complementarity that sort of generates this magnification. And so I was just trying to understand if I had just a model that didn't have the network, but I had a mechanism, just say like capital accumulation, that allowed a firm to kind of push out its production possibilities frontier. Is that the same kind of magnification, or what's really special about the network, where the fact that my supplier is investing and I'm investing, and it's all kind of getting funneled through one firm is getting magnification?
Right. Yeah. Great question, George. I think this no complementarity counterfactual I didn't spend too much time on, which might potentially answer your question. In this word, as I didn't emphasize here, is that firm can still endogenously optimally choose their technology. So in your words, they are still optimizing.
Yep.
So it is still within the network. So originally, we were thinking that maybe potentially scale can still matters, right? So if this is a relatively concentrated network, and the fact that scale turns out to matter, in particular coming from the export market, that will still make the firm want to actually upgrade. This will be the more like the standard channel that we could think about. But what's going on in this case is that because there's no additional push coming from these DQ curves, right? These are the domestic firms, and all that matters is like how big your buyers are. If your buyers are bigger, maybe you can benefit a little bit more. If smaller, maybe you benefit a little bit less. But it doesn't matter at what kind of segment your buyers are. That's important. And this curvature is almost completely generated by these complementarity functions phi-v and phi-y, in particular phi-y, that we documented in our quantitative work. And that's a very key component, generate these slopes. Okay.
Can I chip in? So this is what this is doing, is that the shock is that Daniel keeps on talking as quality bias, is that in our estimates, the exporting to a rich country gives you incentives to upgrade your own quality. And so that's true in both shocks. But what happens is that exporters are very large, and a lot of their purchases and sales are domestic. So if there are these Kramer links, as exporters upgrade, they increase the supply of high quality inputs domestically. That decreases the relative cost for other firms to produce it. That's a blue curve. And it increases the demand for high quality inputs domestically. That's a red curve. But that's the magnification. What Daniel has been calling the magnification effect is that as large exporters upgrade, they increase the domestic demand and supply for high quality inputs. And that's what gives other firms, domestic firms, the incentives to upgrade. Their profits from upgrading is higher now. Is that clear?
Yeah, I just didn't see why having the network was really generating so much extra kick. Because I think Daniel showed another picture where he didn't get the same kick.
Yes.
No, that's not the. Both have the network. To be clear,
Gotcha.
network is not the crucial case. Both have the network. Both have the roundabout production. It's only this channel that the data was describing. This we basically only shut down the quality complementarity in that specific curve. Yeah.
But you're thinking these networks are these investments are happening right away in the data when you were kind of documenting things, and that's what So this is not like this is kind of a static model where all adjustment happens right away, right?
Right. That's right.
And so that's what you were mapping to the data. Okay, I just wanted to know.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The shocks with the data was 5 years, long differences.
Yeah, that's
They were
what
long
I was
differences.
gonna say. Yeah, it's long differences.
Yeah. I also see a question by Yuki. Please.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Quick question. What is so for the search cost or ad posting cost? by what factor is it paid? Is it utility cost or is it paid by wage, labor cost? And how does it affect the welfare implication? Because that's going to change what object you should be looking at, right?
So far this year, sorry, I skipped this part really quick. The search cost being paid in wages of each. This is a question, right? So, hello?
Yeah, that was a question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think it's so far we haven't. Cecilia could chime in. You know, so far we haven't. This is mostly for convenience at this point because it's just a lot easier for us to clear the kind of labor market equilibrium here by thinking about this being paid in wages. There might be some other options. We used to also think about paying that in terms of the output, but it's not as convenient at this point.
Yeah, no, that for tractability, that doesn't matter. What matters is that there isn't a homogeneous wage. So it's important that when a firm, the Q index there, what it's doing is that when a firm decides on its laborers, then all the tasks, whether you're working in posting ads or in production, have to be done at that quality level, at that skill level, which is very consistent with Kramer, but we could have used final goods there as a homogeneous good.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I saw Jonathan.
Yeah, Daniel, I got the model went by kind of quick for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the primitive of a firm? Q, it chooses its Q. You had those omegas, and you talked about omega 0 and omega 1.
Yeah.
And I see this omega 2 bar, and I'm confused about.
Yeah. Sorry, no, that was mostly my fault. I should have been more detailed. Omega 0 and omega 1 are the primitives. These are what we call the capability of the firm. Those are idiosyncratic at the individual firm level. They will draw these omega 0 and omega 1 when they enter this specific industry. They pay the fixed cost and draw these pairs.
And C is the unit cost then?
C is not unit cost. C is just a realized efficiency. So Jonathan, think about the way here that, yeah. So the way here is that omega 1 will typically, not always, but different firms get different draws. But typically, this is going to be like negative. Then, if you choose high quality, your efficiency will actually go down. But this differ across firms. That's why firms will choose different quality because.
Okay, so a high omega for a firm with a very negative omega is going to choose lower quality. So a high quality firm is a firm with an omega that's not that negative. That's
right. But the omega 2 is a parameter. That's going to give us curvature because otherwise, we're going to generate as I talk about in the seminar that because we have the responsiveness about when things change, how do firms reoptimize on their quality decision, and this omega 2 to a certain extent is going to govern in this new situation. How do you change your Q decision?
Okay, so omega 2 is not a firm characteristic.
It's not a firm characteristic. It's just a parameter. It's just a parameter. Yeah, it's needed to be able to respond to this shift share IV magnitude that we have in the reduced form data.
So omega 0 and omega 1 is going to allow us to jointly match the joint distribution of wages and sales. While omega 2, we can't identify a firm-specific omega 2. This is going to mostly govern the wages and the size of the firm.
So a firm here is an omega 0 and an omega 1.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
All right, anybody else? Okay.
Daniel, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was messing up the mute. Somehow I feel like, particularly with your last pictures about the response when more suppliers get into the high quality, and then that kind of has a positive feedback and gives you the bigger general equilibrium effects. It sort of has the spirit of a model with a geographical component and agglomeration, but instead of agglomerating around space, you're kind of agglomerating around different quality levels. And I just wondered if there's a way to think about it that way. Is that fair to think about it that way, that you're sort of saying there's these positive benefits of where a bunch of firms go for high quality, and then that helps them all and sort of has this sort of agglomeration in producing high quality?
Yeah, indeed. Actually, Sam, you're exactly right. I think we do have a similar flavor of like these standard agglomeration forces, like in these geographical models. In fact, we in this quantification, when we're playing with the model, we do find that sometimes when the force of so-called agglomeration is too strong, sometimes our size distribution of the firm, quality distribution of the firm will become like bimodal, in the sense that it's too strong sorting that you're gonna get a cluster of the high quality firms and a cluster of low quality firms. So there's no guarantee.
Like no black hole assumption or something.
Yeah. We do need we still theoretically need to figure that out, but I do think we do have a case. Maybe we have to discipline the force of this agglomeration cannot be too strong. Very much like maybe Triban, like Costa's been thinking about for the spatial dimension models. We do need that not to be too strong to generate a non-degenerate, like a non-bimodal distribution, which is the data. So so far what's been helping a little bit there is because our search protocol, because the direct of the search effort is non-perfect. And the fact that even if I were high quality, I make a lot of effort. I try to match with high quality buyers or sellers. The matching market friction has been preventing me from doing that perfectly. And the noisiness of that actually somehow actually helps to kind of anchor this distribution that still looks relatively well behaved, in fact.
Right.
Yeah.
But somehow with that theme, I wasn't quite so sure that the O-ring part was the key thing of your contribution, as opposed to this kind of agglomerating around different quality levels, which seems a little different than O-ring, because O-ring is kind of like building one thing. You don't want to mess up anything. This has to do with sort of synergies across firms.
Yeah. So we do give a name of O-ring, but there's a distinction, because in the Kramer model, it's very extreme, because the quality and quantity, there's no trade-off, because each task is going to require only one worker, and only the quality of that worker matters. In our case, because of a phi-y function, it does have the O-ring intuition, but remember that's still like embedded into a CS aggregator. So in some sense, it's a weaker version of O-ring, because the quality and quantity still has some trade-off, but it's not as extreme as like in a Kramer model, where you always need only one unit of input from each of your suppliers. Sometimes even they are not high quality, with plenty of quantity, they can still somehow kind of like compensate for that. But the compensation is very, very costly in some sense. So that's the part that why we call it O-ring. But but the fundamental idea is complementarity, I think.
There's another point of calling it O-ring, in that imagine the Kramer's model, right, where you want to hire, if you're producing the more complex, higher quality goods, you want to hire all skilled workers, and you draw the boundary of the firm randomly. Then what you want to buy is from skill-intensive firms. And when you go out and you look for customers, firm customers, you're going to find a bigger market in other skill-intensive firms. And everything we documented about the firm was not really standard measures of quality, it's about skill intensity. So there were quite a few questions on chat on, what do you observe? Do you want to take out everything that's observable about the worker's wage, about the worker's characteristics? And at some level, no, we are using wages as a proxy for skills, just because a lot of the variation is in the residual, but it is about this skill complementarity. You don't want to take out everything that we observe about workers.
Mm-hmm. All right. I guess, yeah.
Just one more quick question. So I think I finally got it based on something that Sam said. So in your model, it's really that my suppliers are also getting the same shock. And so they're doing upgrading, and that's kind of lowering my costs even more.
That's right. That's right.
And so, but in the data, when you looked at the data, where are shocks correlated, or could you control for what was happening at those suppliers?
Yeah, that was related to Rock's earlier question. In the data, I think most of these shift IV strategy, we will have to interpret them as idiosyncratic shocks, in the sense that we have to control for batteries of industry product, all these specific kind of shifters. And the only thing that's going to happen is, like, if George, you are one exporter, I'm another one. If our pre-configuration of our product and destination and the intensity are different in the pre-period, I'm going to compare your outcome versus my outcome. So we have to strictly interpret those coefficients as the idiosyncratic difference between you and me.
Yeah.
That's exactly the strategy we took when we say we match the indirect inference. We didn't really recompute the GE at all. We basically hold all the equilibrium subjects as is, and we are shocking the firm in exactly the same spirit and comparing that in our estimation. But then when we were doing the GE, of course, all the equilibrium subjects like DQ and CQ, they're going to move around, so that that's why in the general equilibrium the kind of response will be actually different.
Yeah, but if these guys are selling to like different markets, then you're not going to get that same amplification, right? So because they don't have as much of an incentive to expand their quality because they didn't really get the shock, and they're only expanding because I got the shock.
Yeah. Empirically, there is a gap there, in the sense that we, in our model, it's just a two-country model. It's home and foreign, so we have to engineer a thing that's comparable to magnitude. But empirically, it's a multi-country. So yeah.
Daniel, can I jump in just about the Empirics? So I mean, this came up in the chat box as well, but it is very unlikely that a firm will get a correlated shock with its supplier, because even if they are exporting to the same market, say Switzerland, it is very unlikely that they are exporting the same product in the same proportion, their sales. But it's an empirical question. I mean, we can easily check it in the data, and we can indeed control a weighted average of supplier export shocks in the regression. It's I mean, it's feasible.
Yeah, mine was really just like how the model worked, and I think I understood that. But there's probably a way of like relating the model to the data again. So great.
All right.
So I think Kim left. And anyone else? Great. So next week, who's next week? There's somebody next week.
I think Natia. Right?
Yes, that's right. Idiot. So great. Thanks so much, everyone. This will be on our YouTube channel with 3 followers eventually. So very productive as usual.
Thanks so much for all the questions, suggestions, and everything. Everyone, also, everyone in the audience, please feel free to email us. This is still early stage work, so we anything, please feel free to shoot us an email.
Good. I'm going to turn off the recording, so if people wanted to talk off the record, they can still talk off the record.